Well, to talk about some of the issues, we're now joined by Roger CALOW, who's head of the Water Policy Programme at the Overseas Development Institute. We'll talk about some of those specific things in more detail in a moment, but just overall, a lot of the speakers at this summit are going to be talking about the global water crisis. What do they mean by that? Are we in a global water crisis? Are we heading for one?
We're in a global water crisis of sorts, but I think we need to think about the word crisis. I think it's less a crisis of water availability. I don't think we're about to run out. But there is an ongoing crisis of access, particularly poor people. We're still in a situation where roughly 750 million people don't have access to safe water. For sanitation, it's a much more frightening number, 2.5 billion. And for those people trying to get access to safe water with all of its health and poverty benefits and its education benefits, particularly for women and girls, it's less about how much water there is and much more about getting hold of it in a reliable way.
This is a huge summit. Lots of countries are involved, so lots of different issues and lots of different technologies coming to the table as well. Who do you think is going to be teaching and who's going to be listening? So which countries should we be looking towards to teach us something about how to save water, how to make water?
Well, for the countries in the Middle East have obviously done lots to increase their efficiency of water use. One of the major things they've done, which is sort of silent and invisible, is, of course, they don't grow all of their own food. So if you're in the water-scarce North Africa region or the Middle East, you essentially balance your water budget by importing food. For every ton of grain, you need about 1 ton of water. So if you import it, you are importing, in virtual form, the water you needed to grow. So there are ways of balancing your water budget without having to do things that are too drastic in country, and going to the global trading system is one thing for food. But of course, that still raises concerns about national food security, national food self-sufficiency. A country that has done actually a lot despite its environmental problems, which are rising now, is China. North China is water scarce. There are big problems in North China and the North China Plain with falling water levels in the groundwater systems. But it's a government that is taking action, recognised the problem, in part because it's a hot political issue. It affects the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party to rule. And they're doing a lot now, having spent a lot of time building new infrastructure, new dams and so on. They're now looking more towards a kind of soft path, if you like, which is sort of demand management and putting in place the regulations, the prices, the governance systems that you need to manage water better, and in particular to allocate water in a kind of rules-based way between agriculture, which is the big water user, generally 70, 80, 90% of a country's water budget will go on agriculture unless you import it, the food, as I said earlier. And with domestic water, municipal water being a pretty small part of the budget. But China has done a lot, India moving in the right direction, Middle East and North Africa also.
OK, so what do African leaders need to do? Because you mentioned some good examples there. I'm thinking also about places like Dubai, which I think 90% of their water comes from the desalination process. That's obviously very expensive. But if African leaders invested more money, would that solve the problem?
It would certainly help. I mean, Africa, the statistics are in some ways very good. African leaders have kind of mobilized political effort and money around extending access to safe water and sanitation. There's a new wave of investment now in things like hydropower, in irrigation in the face of climate change, green energy. Irrigation, you need to deal with rainfall variability, which is going to increase. So this is all good news in part, a lot of it being financed not by the usual suspects, the World Bank, but by the new kids on the block, China, Brazil, and so on, which apply fewer conditions to the money they lend, which is good and bad. The bad part would be, you know, are we taking an adequate look at the kind of environmental concerns that big infrastructure projects raise? So you mentioned, for example, the Grand Renaissance Dam on the Nile being built in Ethiopia. That would be a case in point.
I think we'll have to have you back at some stage because it's a huge issue, isn't it? And some of the technologies I know that are going to be mentioned there at this summit are quite amazing. But for now, Roger CALOW, thank you very much for coming into Arise News.
Thank you.